Have you ever been judged so harshly based on your appearance that it made you question your own worth? Have you ever walked into a place where you knew you belonged, only to be treated like you were invisible, like you were nothing more than dirt on someone's expensive shoes? Well, let me tell you about the day that changed my entire life. The day I walked into the most prestigious hotel in the city wearing clothes that made me look like I had just crawled out of a thrift store bargain bin, and how that single moment of humiliation turned into the most empowering experience of my existence. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what happened to me. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll understand why I'll never forget that day, and why the people who laughed at me will remember it for the rest of their lives too. It was a Tuesday morning, and I remember the sun was shining so brightly that it almost felt like the universe was mocking me, like it was highlighting every single flaw in my appearance as I stood outside the grand entrance of the Regency Grand Hotel. My jeans were faded, not in that trendy, distressed way that costs $200, but in that genuinely worn way that comes from years of washing and wearing the same pair because you can't afford new ones. My sneakers had seen better days, the kind of shoes that had walked thousands of miles, carrying dreams that felt heavier with each step. My jacket was a simple gray hoodie, the kind you'd find at any discount store, with a small stain on the sleeve that I had tried desperately to remove the night before, but couldn't quite get out. My hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, no expensive salon treatment, no carefully styled waves, just practical and plain. I knew I didn't look like I belonged there, but I had been told to come exactly as I was, and so I did, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around and run. The Regency Grand wasn't just any hotel. It was the hotel, the kind of place where celebrities stayed, where business deals worth millions were made over breakfast, where the lobby sparkled with chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. I had walked past this building 100 times in my life, always looking up at its magnificent facade with a mixture of awe and longing, wondering what it would be like to be someone who belonged in a place like that, someone who could walk through those golden revolving doors with confidence, with the certainty that they deserved to be there. But today was different. Today I had a reason to be there, even if I didn't look the part, even if my reflection in those polished glass doors showed someone who seemed so utterly out of place that it was almost comical. As I approached the entrance, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like a drum that was beating out a rhythm of anxiety and fear. My palms were sweating despite the cool morning air, and I kept wiping them on my jeans, trying to calm myself down, trying to convince myself that everything would be fine, that I had every right to be there. The doorman, dressed in an immaculate uniform with golden buttons that gleamed in the sunlight, looked at me with an expression that I had seen so many times before in my life, that look of assessment, of judgment, of someone deciding in a split second whether you were worth their time and attention. His eyes traveled from my worn sneakers up to my simple hoodie, and I saw his lips pressed together in a thin line of disapproval. He didn't move to open the door for me like he had for the elegantly dressed woman who had walked in just moments before. Instead, he just stood there, blocking my path slightly, as if his very presence was meant to remind me that I didn't belong. I cleared my throat, trying to find my voice, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Excuse me," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how uncertain. "I'm here for the VIP services. I have an appointment." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was speaking a language I wasn't quite fluent in, like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. The doorman's eyebrow raised slightly, and I saw the corner of his mouth twitch as if he was suppressing a smile, as if I had just told him the funniest joke he had heard all day. "VIP services?" he repeated, and there was no mistaking the skepticism in his voice, the disbelief, the barely concealed amusement. "Yes," I said, trying to stand a little straighter, trying to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. "I was told to ask for the executive concierge." He looked me up and down again, more slowly this time, more deliberately, as if he was making sure he hadn't missed anything, as if he was giving me one more chance to admit that this was all some kind of mistake, some kind of joke. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was there, unmistakable, a soft chuckle that said more than words ever could. "Miss," he said, and the way he said that word made it sound like an insult. "The VIP services are for hotel guests, for people with reservations, for people who—" He paused, searching for the right words, or perhaps just savoring the moment. "For people who can afford to be here." His eyes flickered to my stained hoodie again, and I felt my face burning with shame, with anger, with a humiliation so deep that it felt like it was consuming me from the inside out. But I didn't leave. even though every instinct told me to run, even though I wanted nothing more than to disappear into the ground and never face another judgmental stare again. I stayed because I had been told to come here, because someone had believed in me enough to send me to this place, because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the layers of insecurity and self-doubt, I knew that I had a right to be there, even if no one else believed it. I have an appointment, I repeated, and this time my voice was firmer, steadier. I was specifically instructed to come here today at 10 o'clock and ask for the executive concierge. If you don't believe me, please check your system. The doorman's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of irritation, as if I was becoming an inconvenience, as if my persistence was ruining his otherwise pleasant morning. Wait here, he said curtly, and finally, he opened the door. But not for me. He stepped inside himself, leaving me standing on the sidewalk like I was something undesirable, like I was something that needed to be kept outside where the real guests wouldn't have to see me. Standing there alone, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. People walked past me, some glancing at me with curiosity, others with pity, and a few with that same judgment I had seen in the doorman's eyes. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because I needed to hold myself together, because I felt like I was falling apart, piece by piece, under the weight of all those stares. I thought about my life, about all the times I had been told I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't pretty enough, wasn't anything enough. I thought about growing up in a small apartment where money was always tight, where my mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, where I learned early on that the world wasn't fair, that some people were born into privilege and others had to fight for every single scrap of dignity and respect. I thought about all the job interviews where I had been passed over for someone who looked more polished, more refined, more like they belonged in the corporate world. I thought about all the times I had tried to better myself, to improve my situation, only to be knocked down again and again by circumstances beyond my control. But I also thought about the phone call I had received 3 days ago, the call that had led me to this moment. It was late at night, and I had been sitting in my tiny studio apartment, eating instant noodles for dinner because it was all I could afford until my next paycheck, when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was probably a telemarketer or a scam, but something made me pick up, some small voice inside that whispered that maybe, just maybe, this could be important. The voice on the other end was professional, calm, and it said words that I had to ask them to repeat because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They said they were calling on behalf of someone who wished to remain anonymous for now, someone who had been watching my work, who had seen something in me that others had missed, someone who wanted to offer me an opportunity that could change my life. All I had to do was show up at the Regency Grand Hotel at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, dress exactly as I normally would, don't try to impress anyone, don't try to look like something I'm not, just be myself, and ask for the executive concierge. They told me to trust them, to trust the process, even if it seemed strange, even if it seemed impossible. And so here I was, trusting complete strangers, standing outside this magnificent hotel in my worn-out clothes, being laughed at by a doorman who had decided my worth based on my appearance, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one feeling like an eternity, and I started to wonder if maybe the doorman was right. Maybe this was all some cruel joke. Maybe I had been foolish to believe that someone out there actually saw value in me. I checked my phone compulsively, looking at the time, watching it creep closer to 10 o'clock, my anxiety building with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like forever but was probably only 5 minutes, the doorman emerged from the hotel, but he wasn't alone. Behind him was a young woman in a crisp hotel uniform, her expression cool and professional, and I saw them exchange a few words before she looked in my direction. Her eyes scanned me just as the doorman's had, with that same assessment, that same judgment, and I braced myself for more humiliation, for more dismissal, for more proof that I didn't belong in their world. She approached me with measured steps, her heels clicking on the pavement in a rhythm that sounded almost threatening, and when she reached me, she smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile that service workers give when they're dealing with someone they consider beneath them, but professionalism requires they maintain appearances. "Good morning," she said, and her tone was polite but cold, like she was reading from a script. "I understand you believe you have an appointment with our VIP services." The way she said believe made it clear she thought no such appointment existed, that she was merely going through the motions before sending me on my way. "I don't believe it. I know it," I said, And I heard the edge in my own voice, the frustration, the hurt, the anger that was starting to bubble up after being suppressed for so long. I was told to be here at 10 o'clock. I was told to ask for the executive concierge, and I was told that everything would be explained when I arrived. The woman's smile tightened slightly, becoming even more forced, and she exchanged a glance with the doorman that spoke volumes. A glance that said, "We have a difficult one here." A glance that said, "Let's handle this quickly and get rid of her." "Miss, I've checked our system and we don't have any appointments scheduled under your name," she said, pulling out a tablet and showing me a screen that I couldn't quite see clearly. "And our VIP services require advance booking and, well, they come with a significant cost that—" She trailed off, her eyes once again traveling over my appearance, making her point without having to say it explicitly. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding," she suggested, in that tone people use when they're trying to be kind while essentially calling you a liar. "Maybe you were meant to go to a different hotel. Or perhaps someone was playing a prank on you." That last suggestion hurt more than anything else. The implication that I was so insignificant, so unimportant, that someone would waste their time playing cruel jokes on me, that I was the kind of person who deserved to be humiliated for entertainment. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall, refusing to give these people the satisfaction of seeing me break down completely. "It's not a prank," I said, and my voice was shaking now, all pretense of confidence crumbling. "I was specifically told to come here. I was told that someone important had arranged this. I was told to trust them." The woman sighed, a long-suffering sigh that suggested she dealt with delusional people like me every day, and she glanced at her watch impatiently. "Look," she said, dropping some of the professional pretense. "I don't know what's going on here, but we're a very busy hotel, and I can't waste time with people who clearly aren't guests. If someone really did send you here, then they should have made proper arrangements. They should have let us know. They should have—" She was interrupted by the sharp sound of a phone ringing. Not her phone, not mine, but the doorman's radio, crackling to life with urgency. He held up one finger, turning away to speak into it quietly, and I saw his expression change dramatically, the smug superiority draining away, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. When he turned back to us, his face had gone pale, and he stammered slightly as he spoke to the woman. Jessica, you need to call Mr. Harrison immediately. He says it's urgent. He says—" He glanced at me nervously. "He says there's a very important guest who should have arrived by now, and if we've turned her away, there will be serious consequences." Jessica's confident demeanor faltered for just a moment, a crack appearing in her professional facade, and she looked at me with new eyes that held a hint of doubt, a hint of concern. "What's your name?" she asked me, and this time there was no condescension in her voice, just urgency, just the beginning of panic. I told her my name, speaking clearly despite my shaking voice, and I watched as she typed it frantically into her tablet, her fingers moving quickly across the screen, her lips pressed together in concentration. The seconds stretched out as she searched, and I could see the exact moment when she found what she was looking for, the exact moment when her face went from concerned to horrified, the color draining from her cheeks as her eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered, and her hands were trembling now. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. There was a miscommunication. Your appointment was flagged under a special category that I didn't check. I should have been more thorough. I should have—" She was babbling now, words tumbling out in a rush of fear and remorse, and both she and the doorman were looking at me like I had suddenly transformed into someone completely different, like the person they had been mocking and dismissing just moments ago had revealed themselves to be someone they should have been treating with reverence and respect all along. My background story, the one that led me to this surreal moment, is not one of privilege or luxury, but of struggle and perseverance that most people could never truly understand unless they had walked in my worn-out shoes. I grew up in the kind of neighborhood where success stories were rare and dreams were often crushed before they even had a chance to take flight, where the sound of sirens was as common as birdsong, where everyone knew everyone else's business because we all lived in such close proximity that privacy was a luxury we couldn't afford. My mother raised me alone after my father left when I was just 6 years old, disappearing one night with promises to return that he never kept, leaving behind a woman who had to suddenly figure out how to support a child on a waitress's salary, and leaving behind a little girl who learned early that people don't always keep their word, that trust is something that has to be earned and can be shattered in an instant. I watched my mother work herself to exhaustion, taking shifts at 2 different diners, coming home with feet so swollen she could barely walk, smelling like grease and coffee, counting every penny to make sure we could pay rent and buy groceries, sacrificing everything for me. Her clothes were always secondhand, her meals were whatever was left over after making sure I was fed, her dreams were put on hold indefinitely so that mine might have a chance to survive. School was my escape and my battlefield simultaneously, a place where I could lose myself in books and learning, but also where the differences between me and my classmates were painfully obvious, in ways that children are cruel enough to point out without hesitation. While other kids wore new clothes and brought lunch money, I wore hand-me-downs from charity drives and ate free lunch in the cafeteria, standing in the line that everyone knew was for the poor kids, feeling the weight of judgment and pity with every step. I excelled academically because it was the one area where poverty couldn't hold me back, where my worn shoes and faded clothes didn't matter, where intelligence and hard work could level the playing field. I threw myself into my studies with a desperation that my teachers sometimes found concerning, staying late in the library not just because I loved learning, but because going home to our cramped apartment where the heat didn't always work in winter, and the air conditioning was non-existent, in summer was depressing, because being at school meant I could pretend for a few more hours that my life was normal, that I was just like everyone else. I graduated with honors, earned a scholarship to a decent college, and thought that finally, my hard work was paying off, that I was on my way to a better life, that the struggling days would soon be behind me. But the universe had other plans that involved more obstacles, more setbacks, more moments of crushing disappointment that tested my resolve in ways I never anticipated. College was where I learned that having intelligence and determination wasn't always enough, that connections and money opened doors that hard work alone couldn't budge, that the world had been designed by people who had never known struggle, and they had built systems that favored their own kind while making it infinitely harder for people like me to climb the ladder. I worked part-time jobs to supplement my scholarship, cleaning offices at night, serving coffee during the day, tutoring students who had more money than motivation, watching as my peers who came from wealthy families secured internships through family connections, while I sent out hundreds of applications that went unanswered because my resume didn't have the right names, didn't come from the right address, didn't signal to employers that I was one of them. I graduated with a degree in business administration and a mountain of student loan debt that felt like chains around my ankles, weighing me down before I had even started running the race, and I entered the job market during a recession, the worst possible timing, competing against hundreds of other desperate graduates for positions that paid barely enough to survive on, let alone thrive. I took whatever work I could find, positions that were far beneath my qualifications, jobs that made my mother cry because she had worked so hard to give me opportunities, and here I was, struggling just like she had, stuck in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. For 3 years after graduation, I worked as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm, a position that was supposed to be temporary but stretched on and on because every time I tried to move up, to apply for promotions, to demonstrate my capabilities, I was passed over for someone who looked more polished, who came from a better background, who knew how to navigate the social politics of the corporate world in ways that I had never been taught. I watched less qualified people get promoted while I remained stagnant, invisible, overlooked, and the frustration built inside me like pressure in a sealed container, threatening to explode but having nowhere to go. I started a side project in my spare time, what little spare time I had between my job and trying to keep up with my student loan payments, and helping my mother whose health was declining from years of hard labor. And this project was my passion, my baby, my hope for something better. I created a small consulting business focused on helping small businesses with their marketing strategies, using everything I had learned in school and in my job, offering my services at rates I could barely afford to charge because I was so desperate for clients, for validation, for proof that I had something valuable to offer the world. It started slowly, painfully slowly, with clients who were skeptical of someone so young and inexperienced looking. But gradually, through word of mouth and sheer stubborn persistence, I started building a reputation for being hardworking, reliable, and surprisingly innovative in my approach to problems. One of my clients was a small family-owned restaurant that was struggling to compete with chain establishments, and I developed a comprehensive social media and community engagement strategy for them that tripled their customer base within 6 months, turning them from a struggling business barely staying afloat into a thriving local success story. The owner was so grateful that he shared my information with other business owners in his network, and suddenly I had more clients than I could handle, more opportunities than I had ever dreamed of, but still no real financial security because I was reinvesting everything back into the business, still living in the same tiny apartment, still wearing the same worn-out clothes because I couldn't justify spending money on myself when there were bills to pay and a future to build. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that one of the business owners I had helped was connected to someone very important, someone who moved in circles so far above my world that I couldn't even imagine them, and that this person had taken notice of my work, had been watching from a distance, had been impressed not just by my results but by the way I had achieved them with so little resources, with so much stacked against me, with a determination and creativity that couldn't be taught in any business school. The mysterious phone call that had brought me to this hotel, standing here being judged and mocked and finally validated, had come from this person's assistant, though I didn't know that yet. I didn't know who had sent me or why they had insisted I come dressed exactly as I was, looking like someone who didn't belong, looking like someone who would be dismissed and underestimated, and now, standing in this opulent lobby as Jessica the concierge fell over herself apologizing and the doorman looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. I was about to find out why my appearance had been so specifically orchestrated, why someone powerful had wanted me to experience exactly what I had just experienced, and how this moment of humiliation was about to transform into the most significant turning point of my entire life. Have you ever experienced that moment when everything you thought you knew about your situation suddenly shifts, when the narrative you've been telling yourself gets rewritten in real time, when you realize that what seemed like the worst moment of your life was actually the beginning of something extraordinary? That's exactly where I was standing, my heart still pounding from the shame and anger of being judged, but now with a flutter of hope beginning to spread through my chest like warm light breaking through dark clouds, as Jessica guided me not to the regular VIP lounge, but to a private elevator that required a special key card, an elevator that took us not up, but down, to a level of the hotel I didn't even know existed, where the real power players of the world conducted their business away from prying eyes. The elevator descended smoothly, and I could see Jessica repeatedly glancing at me in the mirrored walls, her earlier confidence completely shattered, replaced by nervous energy that made her fidget with her tablet and adjust her uniform unnecessarily, and I found myself in the strange position of being the one who felt calmer between the two of us, even though I had no idea what was happening or where we were going. The elevator doors opened to reveal a corridor that was nothing like the opulent showiness of the main lobby. Instead, it was understated luxury, all clean lines and subtle elegance, the kind of design that whispered wealth rather than shouting it, and Jessica led me to a door at the end of the hall, knocked softly, and when a voice inside said, "Come in," she opened the door but didn't follow me inside. Instead, she stepped back with a small bow, as if I was royalty and she was a servant, the complete opposite of how she had treated me just minutes ago on the sidewalk. I stepped into the room alone, my worn sneakers sinking into carpet so thick and soft it felt like walking on clouds, and I looked around at an office that was more like a private sanctuary, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that took my breath away, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and sitting behind a massive desk made of dark wood that gleamed like polished stone was a man I recognized immediately even though we had never met. A man whose face I had seen in business magazines and news articles. A man who was one of the wealthiest and most influential people not just in this city but in the entire country. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire entrepreneur who had built an empire from nothing, who had started with a single small tech company in his garage and had turned it into a multinational corporation that touched nearly every aspect of modern life, who was known for his brilliant business mind but also for his eccentric methods and his ability to spot talent in places others never thought to look. He was sitting there looking at me with eyes that were sharp and assessing but not unkind, and he gestured to the chair across from him with a slight smile. "Please, sit down," he said, and his voice was warm, friendly even. Nothing like what I had expected from someone of his stature. "And please accept my sincere apologies for what you experienced outside." That was intentional, I'm afraid, but I promise there was a purpose to it that I will explain. I sat down slowly, carefully, feeling like I was in a dream, like at any moment I would wake up back in my apartment and realize this was all some elaborate fantasy my exhausted brain had conjured up, and I looked at him with confusion and wonder, and 100 questions fighting to get out of my mouth all at once. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made me feel like he could see right through me, like he was reading every thought, every fear, every hope I had ever had, and after a long moment of silence that felt charged with significance, he began to speak. "I've been watching your work for the past 8 months," he said, And his words hit me like a physical force. 8 months. That was longer than I had even realized I had been making any kind of impact. Or rather, someone in my organization has been watching and reporting back to me. Do you remember the Antonelli family restaurant? The one that was about to close until you helped them turn things around? I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with emotion, and he continued. The owner's brother is a mid-level manager in one of my subsidiary companies, and he mentioned your name in a regional meeting. Talked about how you had performed what he called a miracle with limited resources and unlimited determination. That got my attention, because miracles don't happen in business, but brilliant strategy and hard work do, and I'm always looking for people who understand that. He paused, taking a sip from a glass of water on his desk, and I sat frozen, barely breathing, trying to process what he was saying, trying to understand why someone like him would care about someone like me, why my small successes would even register on his radar when he dealt with ventures worth billions of dollars. I had my team look into you, he continued, not in a creepy stalking way, but in a due diligence way, because if I'm going to invest in someone, I need to know who they are, what they're made of, what drives them. What I found was remarkable, not because of what you've achieved, though that's impressive given your circumstances, but because of how you've achieved it, the obstacles you've overcome, the resilience you've demonstrated, the creativity and innovation you've applied to problems with virtually no budget, no connections, no advantages whatsoever. You've been fighting with one hand tied behind your back, and you've still managed to win more often than not, which made me think about what you could accomplish if someone untied that hand, if someone gave you the resources and opportunities that you've earned, but never been given because of circumstances beyond your control. My eyes were burning with tears now, and I blinked them back furiously, not wanting to cry in front of this man who held my future in his hands, but his words were touching something deep inside me, validating struggles I had thought no one saw, acknowledging sacrifices I had made that no one had ever noticed, and it was overwhelming in a way that made my chest ache with emotion I couldn't quite name. But I needed to see something first, Marcus said, and his expression became more serious. I needed to see how you would handle adversity, how you would respond when faced with the kind of treatment that people like you, people who don't look the part, people who don't come from privilege, experience every single day in the corporate world. So I arranged this little test. I told my assistant to call you, to instruct you to come here dressed exactly as you normally would. No pretense, no attempt to fit in. And I told the front desk and concierge staff that there would be a VIP appointment, but I deliberately didn't give them your name or description. I wanted to see how they would treat someone who showed up looking like you, looking like they didn't belong, looking like they couldn't possibly be someone important. The realization hit me like ice water. This had all been orchestrated. The humiliation, the judgment, the mockery. It had all been a test. A deliberate setup designed to see how I would react. And I felt anger flaring up inside me, hot and righteous. Because who was he to put me through that? Who was he to manufacture my pain as some kind of experiment? He must have seen the anger in my eyes because he held up his hand, his expression apologetic. I know that seems cruel, he said. And maybe it was, but I needed to know if you would stand your ground, if you would maintain your dignity even when being dismissed, if you had the strength to persist even when everything and everyone was telling you that you didn't belong. Because where I want to take you, the opportunity I want to offer you, it's going to put you in rooms full of people who will judge you exactly like those staff members did, who will underestimate you, who will think you don't belong, and I needed to know that you could handle that you wouldn't break, that you wouldn't run, that you would stand there and demand the respect you deserve even when no one wants to give it to you. His words made sense in a way that I didn't want them to, because I understood what he was saying even as I hated that it had been necessary, even as I hated that this was the reality of the world we lived in, where people like me had to constantly prove ourselves in ways that people born into privilege never did, where our resilience was tested and measured and judged before we were even given a chance to show what we could really do. I watched the entire thing on security cameras, Marcus continued, and he turned his computer monitor slightly so I could see multiple camera angles showing the hotel entrance, showing me standing there alone, showing Jessica and the doorman's dismissive treatment, showing my face as I struggled to maintain my composure. And it was surreal and painful to see myself from the outside, to see how small I had looked, how vulnerable, how much courage it had actually taken to stand there and not run away. I saw your face when that doorman laughed at you, Marcus said quietly, and there was something like respect in his voice. I saw you fighting back tears, fighting back the urge to defend yourself or lash out, I saw you maintaining your dignity even when it would have been so much easier to either break down or become aggressive. And that's when I knew I had made the right choice. That's when I knew you were exactly the kind of person I was looking for. Someone who has been forged in fire and come out stronger rather than bitter. Someone who understands humiliation but chooses grace. Someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated and uses that as motivation rather than as an excuse. He stood up from his desk and walked over to the windows, looking out at the city spread below us, and I remained seated, my mind racing, trying to process everything he had said, trying to understand where this was going, what he wanted from me, what this opportunity he kept mentioning could possibly be. "I'm launching a new division of my company," he said, still looking out the window, his back to me, focused on finding and developing innovative solutions for small to medium-sized businesses, the kind of businesses that don't have access to the expensive consulting firms and marketing agencies that larger corporations use, the kind of businesses where people like you, people with talent and drive but no connections or resources, actually work and struggle and try to build something meaningful. The big consulting firms don't want to bother with these smaller clients because there's not enough money in it for them, but I believe there's enormous potential there, both in terms of social impact and eventual profit if it's done right. If we can create scalable solutions that work for businesses with limited budgets, if we can democratize access to the kind of strategic thinking and innovative approaches that have traditionally only been available to the wealthy. He turned back to face me, and his expression was intense, focused, the look of someone who was about to make an offer that would change everything, and I felt my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. "I want you to head this division," he said simply, and the words hung in the air between us like something solid and real and absolutely impossible. "I want you to build a team, develop methodologies, create case studies, essentially take everything you've learned from working with limited resources and turn it into a business model that can help thousands of other small businesses and entrepreneurs who are in the same position you were in. You'll have a real budget, a real salary that will probably be more money than you've ever made in your life, benefits, resources, and most importantly, you'll have my full support and the weight of my name and company behind you, which means doors that were closed to you before will suddenly open. People who dismissed you before will suddenly take you seriously. Opportunities that seemed impossible before will suddenly become achievable." I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't breathe. My lungs had forgotten how to function, because what he was saying was so far beyond anything I had ever imagined, so impossibly perfect that it had to be a dream, had to be some kind of cruel joke, had to be anything other than real because real life didn't work this way. People like me didn't get opportunities like this, didn't get discovered by billionaires, didn't get handed the keys to their own division of a major company. "Why me?" I managed to whisper, and my voice was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. "Why would you trust someone like me with something so important, someone you don't even know, someone who has no real experience running anything larger than a one-person operation, someone who showed up to your hotel in worn-out clothes and got laughed at by your staff?" Marcus smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less intimidating, more human. "Because you've already been doing this, just without the resources or recognition," he said. "Because you understand the struggle in a way that no MBA from Harvard ever could. Because you've lived the reality that we're trying to address. Because you have something that can't be taught or bought. You have authenticity and passion and a genuine desire to help people who remind you of where you came from. Most importantly, because you stood outside my hotel being judged and dismissed and humiliated, and you didn't run, you didn't lash out, you didn't let them make you feel like you were less than you are. And if you can do that in your personal life, you can certainly do it in business when you're representing my company and fighting for clients who need someone like you in their corner." The tears came then. I couldn't stop them anymore. They poured down my face in hot streams that I didn't even try to wipe away. And I was sobbing, actually sobbing, right there in this billionaire's office, crying like a child because it was too much. The relief and joy and disbelief and gratitude all crashing over me at once like a wave that I had no defense against. Marcus didn't seem uncomfortable with my tears. He simply waited, patient and understanding, until I could compose myself enough to speak. "When do I start?" I asked, and even through my tears I could hear the determination in my voice, the excitement, the readiness to prove that his faith in me wasn't misplaced, that I could do this, that I could be everything he believed I could be. "Immediately," he said. "In fact, that's why I had you come today. We have a lot to discuss, contracts to review, teams to meet. But first, I think you should go back upstairs and have a conversation with Jessica and that doorman. Not to get them in trouble. They were just doing what society has trained them to do, judging people based on superficial appearances, but to show them who you really are, to let them see that the person they dismissed is actually someone far more important and valuable than they could have imagined, because that's a lesson they need to learn. And frankly, because I think you've earned the right to see their faces when they realize how badly they misjudged you. The elevator ride back up to the main lobby felt completely different than the ride down had been. I was still the same person in the same worn clothes, but everything had changed. I had changed. Or rather, I had been given permission to finally be who I really was without apology or shame, to own my worth without needing external validation, though I had to admit that the external validation from someone as powerful as Marcus Sterling certainly didn't hurt. When the elevator doors opened, Jessica was standing nearby, clearly waiting for me to return. And when she saw me, she rushed over with an expression of such anxiety and concern that it would have been comical if the whole situation wasn't so surreal. "Miss, I cannot apologize enough for what happened earlier," she began, words tumbling out in a rush. "I should have been more thorough. I should have checked all the systems. I should never have judged you based on your appearance. I completely understand if you want to file a complaint, and I take full responsibility for—" I held up my hand, stopping her mid-sentence, and I saw her face go pale, probably expecting the worst, expecting that I was about to unleash all the anger and hurt from earlier, expecting consequences for her treatment of me. But I wasn't angry anymore, not really, because I understood something that I hadn't fully grasped before this moment, which was that her behavior wasn't personal. It was systemic. It was the result of a society that had taught her to equate worth with appearance, success with expensive clothes, importance with surface-level markers of wealth and status. And while that didn't excuse her actions, it did help me understand them. It did help me see that her judgment of me said more about her limitations than mine, about what she had been trained to value rather than what actually mattered. "Jessica," I said, and my voice was calm, even kind. "I accept your apology, but I want you to understand something. I'm going to be working here, in this building, quite frequently over the next months and years, heading a new division for Mr. Sterling's company, and I'm going to be bringing clients here. People who might not look like they belong. People who might be wearing clothes from discount stores and shoes with worn soles. People who society has taught you to dismiss as unimportant. And I need you to understand that those are exactly the people who matter most. Those are exactly the people who deserve your respect and excellent service, because you never know who someone really is or what they're capable of based on what they're wearing or where they come from." Jessica's eyes had widened as I spoke, and I could see the realization dawning on her face, the understanding of just how badly she had misjudged me, just how close she had come to making a career-ending mistake by dismissing someone who was about to become a regular and important presence in this hotel. "I understand," she said quietly, and for the first time since I had met her, her professional mask slipped, and I could see real emotion on her face, real shame and regret. "And I promise you, I will never make that mistake again. I will treat every person who walks through these doors with the respect they deserve, regardless of how they look or how I think they should be treated." I nodded, satisfied, and I saw the doorman hovering nearby, clearly wanting to apologize as well but unsure if he should approach, and I decided to give him the same grace I had given Jessica, to turn this moment into a teaching opportunity rather than a chance for revenge, because what would punishing them accomplish really? It wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't erase the hurt. It would only perpetuate a cycle of negativity and resentment that I didn't want to carry forward into this new chapter of my life. Over the next several hours, I met with Marcus's executive team, brilliant people who would become my colleagues and mentors. I reviewed contracts that offered me a salary 3 times what I had been making. I discussed the scope and vision for this new division, and I felt myself transforming from someone who had been invisible and dismissed into someone who had value, whose opinions mattered, whose ideas were taken seriously and met with enthusiasm rather than skepticism. We talked strategy and budgets and timelines. We discussed potential clients and marketing approaches. We brainstormed innovative solutions and debated methodologies. And through it all, I felt like I was finally being seen for who I really was, for what I was capable of, for the potential that had always been there but had never been recognized or nurtured, because I didn't fit the mold of what people expected success to look like. As the day wore on and the meetings concluded, Marcus walked me back to the private elevator, and before the doors closed, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked me directly in the eyes with an intensity that made sure I was really listening to what he was about to say. "You're going to face more Jessicas and doormen in your career," he said seriously. "People who will judge you, who will underestimate you, who will think you don't belong in the rooms you're in or the positions you hold. And it's going to hurt sometimes. It's going to make you angry sometimes. It's going to make you doubt yourself sometimes. But I want you to remember this day. Remember what you felt standing outside being dismissed. Remember the strength it took to not run away. Remember that you earned this opportunity not in spite of your background, but because of it. Because the struggles you've faced have made you stronger and wiser and more determined than most people ever have to be. Use that strength, use that wisdom, use that determination. And when people try to make you feel small, remember that you're not small, you're extraordinary. And the only opinion that matters is your own belief in your abilities and worth." His words settled into my heart like seeds that I knew would grow into something powerful, something that would sustain me through all the challenges that lay ahead. And I thanked him with a voice thick with emotion before stepping into the elevator that would take me back up to the lobby, back out into the world that suddenly felt full of possibilities instead of obstacles, full of open doors instead of closed ones, full of opportunities to prove not just what I could do, but what others like me could do if only they were given a chance. When I finally left the hotel that evening, the sun was setting and casting golden light across the city, and I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, where I had stood that morning being judged and dismissed. But everything looked different now. Everything felt different now. Because I was different now. Not in my clothes or appearance, but in my understanding of my own worth, in my confidence that I deserved good things, that I deserved opportunities, that I deserved respect regardless of what I was wearing or where I came from. I thought about calling my mother to tell her what had happened, but I decided to wait until I could see her in person, until I could watch her face as I explained that her sacrifices had not been in vain, that her daughter was going to be okay, better than okay, that we were going to be okay, that the struggling days were finally coming to an end. I thought about all the other people out there like me, struggling to be seen, fighting to be heard, working so hard with so little, and I made a silent promise to myself and to them that I would use this opportunity not just to better my own life, but to create pathways for others, to build systems and programs that would help level the playing field, to be for someone else what Marcus Sterling had been for me, someone who looked past the surface and saw the potential beneath. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity that left me exhausted but exhilarated. I worked longer hours than I ever had before, but it didn't feel like work in the painful, grinding way it had at my previous job. Instead, it felt like purpose, like I was building something meaningful, like every hour I invested was moving me closer to a vision that mattered not just to me, but to countless others who needed what we were creating. I assembled a team of 5 talented individuals, and I made sure to recruit people who had backgrounds similar to mine, people who had faced obstacles and overcome them, people who understood struggle and could bring that perspective to our work with small business clients who were fighting to survive and thrive in a competitive market that seemed designed to favor established players with deep pockets. We developed a methodology that was part consulting, part mentoring, part community building. And we started taking on clients, small restaurants and retail shops and service businesses that were barely surviving but had potential, had vision, had owners who were working their hearts out but didn't know how to translate that hard work into sustainable success. Our first major success story was a small bakery run by a single mother who had been on the verge of closing after 2 years of struggling to compete with chain bakeries that could undercut her prices, and we helped her reposition her brand to focus on artisanal quality and community connection. Rather than trying to compete on price, we helped her develop a social media presence that told her story in authentic ways that resonated with customers who cared about supporting local businesses. We helped her create partnerships with coffee shops and restaurants that wanted to source from local suppliers, and within 4 months her revenue had increased by 60%, and she was hiring her first employee. And when she hugged me with tears in her eyes, thanking me for saving her business, and by extension her family's livelihood, I felt a satisfaction and fulfillment that no corporate promotion or salary increase could ever have provided, because I knew I had made a real difference in someone's life. I had been the person I wished had existed for me during my struggling years. I had paid forward the grace and opportunity that Marcus had given me. The word spread quickly in the small business community about what we were doing, and soon we had more requests for our services than we could handle, which meant we were able to expand the team, to develop more sophisticated tools and frameworks, to create case studies and training materials that could help us scale our impact beyond just the clients we could work with directly. And throughout all of it, I remained grounded in the memory of standing outside that hotel being judged and dismissed, because that memory kept me humble and hungry, kept me focused on who we were really serving and why it mattered, kept me from ever forgetting that success wasn't just about making money or building an impressive resume, but about creating opportunities for people who deserved them, but hadn't been given them by a system that valued the wrong things. Marcus checked in regularly, not micromanaging but providing guidance and opening doors when needed, and I came to see him not just as my boss, but as a mentor who genuinely cared about the work we were doing and the people we were helping, who understood on a fundamental level that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in the positive impact you could have on others' lives. 6 months into my new role, we organized a showcase event at the hotel where this journey had begun, inviting all of our clients to share their success stories, to network with each other, to celebrate how far they had come with our help and their own hard work and determination. And as I stood in that ballroom watching small business owners who had been struggling just months ago now, thriving and connecting and supporting each other, I felt a sense of achievement and purpose that I had never experienced before in my life. And when Marcus gave a speech praising the work we had done and specifically calling out my leadership and vision, when the room erupted in applause and I saw Jessica, the concierge, and even that doorman in the back of the room clapping enthusiastically with genuine respect on their faces, I realized that this was redemption. Not just for me, but for every person who had ever been underestimated, every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough, every person who had ever stood where I had stood that morning 6 months ago, feeling small and invisible and worthless. Because our success was proving that worth isn't determined by appearance or background or circumstances, but by character and capability and determination. But the most meaningful moment of that evening came when my mother arrived. I had sent a car to bring her because she didn't own one, and I wanted her to experience just a small taste of the world I was now part of. And when she walked into that hotel in her simple dress that I knew was the nicest thing she owned, when she looked around at the elegance and sophistication with wide eyes, when she saw me standing there confident and respected and successful, she started crying, and I left the event I was supposed to be hosting, and I went to her and I held her as she sobbed with relief and pride and overwhelming emotion, and she whispered in my ear, "I knew you could do it. I always knew you had something special. I just wish the world had seen it sooner." And I whispered back, "You gave me everything I needed. You taught me how to persevere, how to maintain dignity in the face of disrespect, how to keep fighting even when everything seems impossible. And every success I have is because of the foundation you built for me through your sacrifices." We stood there in that lobby holding each other and crying, and I didn't care who saw or what they thought, because this moment was ours. This victory was ours. And no amount of professional decorum was more important than honoring the woman who had given me life and then given everything she had to make sure that life had meaning and possibility. Looking back now, I can see how that single day, that moment of being judged and dismissed and then validated and empowered, was the turning point that changed the entire trajectory of my life. But more than that, it changed how I saw myself, how I understood my own worth, how I approached challenges and opportunities. I learned that sometimes the moments that feel like our greatest humiliations are actually setups for our greatest triumphs, that sometimes we have to be broken down before we can be built back up stronger than before, that sometimes the universe puts us in situations that test us specifically because we're about to be given something important and we need to prove we can handle it with grace and wisdom. I learned that appearances are deceiving in both directions, that I had been wrong to feel ashamed of my worn-out clothes and simple appearance because those things said nothing about my capabilities or value, just as the staff had been wrong to judge me based on those superficial markers because they said nothing about who I really was or what I was capable of achieving. Now, almost a year later, I still dress relatively simply. I could afford expensive designer clothes now with my new salary, but I choose not to make that a priority because I've learned that true confidence comes from knowing your worth internally rather than displaying it externally, and because I want to remain connected to the struggle, to remember where I came from, to be approachable to the clients we serve who might feel intimidated if I showed up looking like I had never known hardship. I wear my background as a badge of honor now rather than a source of shame. I speak openly in interviews and presentations about growing up poor, about struggling to find opportunities, about being underestimated and dismissed, because I know that my story resonates with so many people who are still in the thick of their own struggles, still waiting for their breakthrough moment, still wondering if all their hard work will ever pay off, and I want them to know that it can, that it does, that they matter even when the world treats them like they don't. The division I'm heading has now helped over 200 small businesses improve their operations and increase their revenue. We've created jobs in communities that desperately needed them. We've kept family businesses from closing. We've helped entrepreneurs turn their dreams into sustainable realities. And the financial success of the division has exceeded even Marcus's optimistic projections, proving that doing good and doing well don't have to be mutually exclusive, that there is indeed a business model in serving the underserved, that investing in people who haven't been given opportunities yet is not just morally right, but strategically smart. We're expanding now, opening offices in other cities, developing online platforms and tools that can reach even more businesses, creating mentorship programs that connect successful entrepreneurs with those just starting out, and I'm being asked to speak at conferences and universities about our model and approach. Me, the girl who was laughed at by a hotel doorman less than a year ago, now being held up as an example of innovative business leadership and social entrepreneurship. And every time I walk into that hotel now, whether for meetings or events, Jessica greets me warmly and professionally, with genuine respect that goes beyond just knowing I'm important to the hotel's business, but with respect that comes from having learned a valuable lesson about prejudgment and the cost of making assumptions based on appearances. And the doorman, whose name I learned is Robert, always opens the door for me with a smile, and sometimes with a comment about how he tells new staff members the story of the day. He dismissed someone who turned out to be one of the most important people associated with the hotel, using his own mistake as a teaching tool for others, and I appreciate that he's taken responsibility for his error and turned it into something constructive rather than just feeling embarrassed and defensive about it. The Regency Grand Hotel has actually become a partner in some of our showcase events, offering their spaces at reduced rates for networking events and workshops that bring together small business owners. And the hotel's management has used our story in their staff training as an example of why every guest deserves excellent service regardless of their appearance, why judgment has no place in hospitality, why you never know who someone really is or might become. Sometimes I think about alternate timelines, about what would have happened if I had run away that morning when the doorman laughed at me, if I had let the humiliation win, if I had decided that clearly I didn't belong and went home to my tiny apartment and never returned. And I realized that I would have missed out on not just a job opportunity, but on discovering my own strength, on learning that I could withstand judgment and dismissal and still maintain my dignity, on proving to myself that I was worth fighting for even when no one else seemed to think so. And that internal shift, that change in how I saw myself and my right to take up space in the world, was perhaps even more valuable than the professional opportunities that followed, because that inner transformation is what allowed me to step into leadership with confidence, to advocate for our clients with conviction, to build something meaningful with courage. I still remember vividly how it felt to stand on that sidewalk, feeling small and worthless and judged, and I carry that memory with me always. Not as a wound, but as a reminder to never make anyone else feel that way, to never judge someone based on their appearance or circumstances, to always look deeper and see the potential and humanity in every person I encounter. I use that memory to fuel my empathy for our clients who come to us feeling defeated and desperate, who have been told by banks they're not creditworthy, told by traditional consultants they're too small to bother with, told by 1,000 small interactions with a world that values wealth and polish over substance and character, that they don't matter, and I tell them, you do matter, your dreams matter, your hard work matters, and I'm going to help you prove it. And I mean it with every fiber of my being because I know what it's like to be dismissed. I know what it's like to be underestimated. And I know what it's like to finally be seen and validated and given a chance to show what you're really capable of achieving. The journey from that morning of humiliation to this place of purpose and impact has taught me so many lessons that I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, my struggling self, my desperate self, who wondered if things would ever get better. And the most important lesson is this: your worth is not determined by how others treat you or see you. Your worth is inherent and unchangeable. And the people who judge you based on superficial factors are revealing their own limitations, not yours. They're showing you their inability to see depth and potential and value beyond surface appearances. And while their judgment might hurt, it cannot diminish who you really are unless you allow it to, unless you internalize their narrow view and make it your own truth. I learned that resilience isn't about never feeling hurt or defeated. It's about feeling those things and continuing forward anyway. It's about crying in the bathroom and then washing your face and walking back out with your head high. It's about being knocked down and getting back up one more time than you were knocked down. It's about believing in yourself even when evidence suggests you shouldn't, especially when evidence suggests you shouldn't, because often the greatest successes come to those who refuse to accept the limitations that others tried to impose on them. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance, your background, your circumstances? Have you ever stood somewhere feeling like you didn't belong, feeling like everyone could see that you were an imposter, feeling like you should just give up and go home because clearly this wasn't meant for you? I want you to know that those feelings are valid, but they're not truth. I want you to know that you belong anywhere you have the courage to show up. I want you to know that the people who judge you are often projecting their own insecurities and limitations onto you, and their judgment says nothing about your actual worth or potential. Comment below and tell me about a time when you were underestimated. Tell me how you handled it. Tell me if my story resonates with your own experiences, because I believe that sharing these stories, acknowledging these struggles creates connection and community and reminds us all that we're not alone in facing judgment and prejudice, and the daily challenges of trying to build something meaningful in a world that doesn't always make it easy. Understanding content like this, stories about overcoming adversity and refusing to let others define your worth, is so important because it reminds us that success isn't reserved for people who look a certain way or come from certain backgrounds. It reminds us that the qualities that really matter, determination and resilience and integrity and creativity, exist in people from all walks of life. And it challenges us to examine our own prejudices and assumptions, to question whether we're judging people fairly or whether we're making the same mistakes that Jessica and Robert made with me, dismissing people who deserve our respect and attention because they don't fit our preconceived notions of what success or importance looks like. This story isn't just about me getting an amazing job opportunity. It's about the systemic issues that keep talented people trapped in cycles of poverty and limited opportunity. It's about how small acts of judgment and dismissal compound over time to create barriers that are incredibly difficult to overcome. And it's about how one person with power and resources can make a difference by looking beyond the surface and investing in potential that others have overlooked. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about the people you encounter who might not look successful but might have incredible potential, if it inspired you to believe in your own worth even when others don't see it, then please leave a like on this video. Your support means everything, and it helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. People who are standing outside their own metaphorical hotels being judged and dismissed and wondering if they should just give up. And I want them to find this story. I want them to know that their breakthrough might be just on the other side of their greatest moment of humiliation. I want them to know that they matter and their dreams matter and they deserve opportunities just as much as anyone else. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people overcoming real obstacles, stories about transformation and redemption and the power of believing in yourself even when no one else does, then please subscribe to Through My Eyes. This is what we do here. We share authentic experiences that remind you of your own strength and potential. We create a community of people who refuse to let circumstances or judgment define their futures, and we celebrate the victories, both large and small, of people who dared to keep showing up even when the world told them they didn't belong. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear on the day you're about to give up, on the day you're questioning whether you should keep fighting, on the day you need to be reminded that you're extraordinary even when you don't feel like it. Because I promise you, there's someone out there who needs to hear your story too. Someone who needs to know they're not alone in their struggles. And together, by sharing these experiences and supporting each other, we can create a world where fewer people have to experience the kind of dismissal and judgment that I faced that morning, and more people get to experience the validation and opportunity that followed.